Hi, welcome back to Hydroponics Daily. A short and sweet one today because it's a Sunday evening and I haven't prepared it. I just remembered I've got a podcast I haven't done today. So I thought I'd do a episode on inlet filters and why you should have a filter on your inlet ducting. So obviously people have filters on their outlets to control odors. So you put carbon filters, but a inlet filter is equally important in my eyes. And that is to keep out unwanted pests and some diseases, but not all diseases and not all pests. So depending on where it's positioned, you could best not to have your inlet coming in from near to ground level because a lot of pests cannot actually fly very high. So something like a flea beetle or things like the insects, I think like carrot flies and things like this, they can't fly over like a meter and a half. Things. So you actually want to position it high up if you can on the highest floor and bring that down if you can, whatever's feasible. And then you want a mesh filter. So this is not a chemical filter. This is a mesh filter. And the easiest method is to get a pair of tights and cut it up and just tie that over either the outer section or the inner section of the filter. It doesn't really matter. You could buy a specialist filter, and obviously if you're a bloke, you can borrow your partner's or your mum's or anybody, as long as they're not fishnet tights and that the pores are small enough to prevent any insect coming through. So you'll prevent butterflies, and that's why you don't get caterpillars as a pest. Moths and butterflies, any Lepidoptera, as they say, for butterflies and moths, you'll prevent them by just having any filter. Really, will stop a butterfly, and therefore caterpillars. You'll prevent flea beetles and the maggots and sort of fly-based pests that you might get outside, like on cereals. You get frit fly, which is a fly pest. You'll get all the aphids and the aphid type pests. So that's white fly, black fly, mealybug, scale insect. They're all belong to the aphids, and you prevent all of those by having an inlet filter as long as it's well protected. Now, the one thing that you'll prevent viruses coming into the grow room in that you won't aphids and thrips particularly. Aphids and thrips are what's called vectors for viruses. So the virus doesn't grow in them, but the insects transfer it from plant to plant. And it's thought they've evolved. This is symbiotic because sick plants help pests and being transported helps the virus. So viruses vectoring on aphids and thrips, that will be prevented by having an inlet filter. Viruses can't survive in the air, so they don't float around like a spore. And so the only other way you're going to get viruses in your grow room is on infected cutting material like secateurs and knives, or on cuttings coming in, maybe on some seeds as well. Now, you won't prevent mildews and pollen from coming into your grow room with most filters. So if you're growing a dioecious crop and you want to keep the females unpollinated, then pollen will still come in through most filters. You'd have to be a very strong filter and also a very strong fan to pull the air through that very fine gauge filter. It's probably not worth it, and it would cause a lot of noise as well. And then the same for mildew spores. They're under 50 micron, certainly, and so 50 micrometers, and so you're not going to get that with something like a tight. Some old tights are not going to prevent spores or pollen from getting through. The other thing to consider is don't leave the doors of your grow room open. Fungus gnats will get in very easily. They can smell the moisture. They're hanging around near the grow room. If we find that if you've got house plants, the fungus gnats will come from the house plants and sort of congregate near the grow room because they can smell the damp soil inside, and that might be a good reason to have a mesh filter on both the inner and outer part of your inlet piping, because if you had to say take the the mesh off for cleaning or maintenance or for some other reason, there could be fungus gnats hanging around in there. And they could, if you've cleaned out fungus gnats and you've got a fungus gnat free growing environment, then obviously you want to keep them out. So our grow rooms at the minute, Utrema, they're all fungus gnat free. And so we've got filters on. Those filters are on second floor. And I've also made a contraption that is not health and safety legal, shall we say, that involves a pot of decomposing grow media sat above one of those electrocution units for insects. That seems to be working extremely well for controlling fungus gnats, but as my colleague Matthew says, it is a bit dangerous with the electricity and the water, so we have to keep them separate, and we don't leave it on overnight. So that's why we control fungus gnats at the moment, but I'd say an inlet filter is a lot safer. If you know of any specialist inlet filters, let me know. They're not as popular, and I don't think there are any commercially available ones, but I might be wrong. Maybe there's an added feature you could add to your inlet filter, as well as just keeping out pests and diseases. It's one to think about. I haven't thought about enough. And yeah, that's been Hydroponics Daily for today. Inlet filters. If you think I've missed anything drastic on that one, let me know. Until tomorrow. Thank you very much for listening.